Hey everyone, welcome back to our YouTube channel. I'm Chris Thompson.
I'm Mike Mandel.
Mike Mandel. We're teaching about hypnosis, and in this case, we're teaching on hypnotic metaphor. We have a video already on what metaphors are and how they work. Now we want to talk about where should you use a hypnotic metaphor. So,
Great question. Well, you are using them already. In fact, in any conversation, in any ordinary conversation, and is there any kind of conversation that isn't an ordinary conversation? I don't know. But in any conversation, you are using metaphors in your speech about every 6 to 10 seconds. It'll be something like, oh, it was just a solid idea. Well, the idea can't be solid. You know, I hit that on the head. You know, oh, he missed the bus, you know, in his life. All of these things are metaphors that we use in our conversation because of the brain's pattern matching system, which helps us understand these things.
Now, we're not talking about that kind of metaphorical interaction. We're just pointing out the idea that metaphors happening all the time. We relate things to other things that we're familiar with. So the other kind of metaphor is telling stories. Now, people who haven't done any hypnosis training at all, they tell stories all the time.
Yes.
Oh, you wouldn't believe what happened to me last week when I went to the office and this guy came in, whatever it is. But the thing is, people aren't generally telling those stories with an intentional hypnotic purpose. Right?
Now, in an ordinary conversation, you can practice by telling metaphors that have a hypnotic purpose, that have a message that goes deep into the other person's psyche.
So, exactly. Now, if you craft these stories and have them ready to deliver at the right moment, you can do hypnosis conversationally through hypnotic metaphor in an everyday conversation with your friend at the pub, or your colleague who's having a problem, or your kids or your spouse, or you name it, best friends, whatever, doesn't matter.
Perfect.
So conversations are one good example.
Well, what about during a formal hypnosis session? If you're working with a client, you can actually use a metaphor at the beginning of the session. And when you explain about seeding suggestions.
Okay, so yeah, there are two ways that a hypnotist can use a metaphor in a session. The first, as we're talking about, is right before the session begins, before the formal part of the session begins.
Before you do the actual hypnosis?
Before the client knows that you're doing the hypnosis, but you're doing the hypnosis. So you could be seeding a suggestion. I'll give you a simple example. So say that a client comes in and they've got an issue in respecting their own personal time, and they're calling it a boundary issue. I have boundaries and I seem to let people take up too much of my time, and I never end up having any time for myself. Well, let's say you happen to know that this person is also an athlete and plays court sports. Well, you know that sports on courts, that's weird, they have lines, and these lines represent boundaries, and you typically know that if the ball lands in the court, you get a point, or if it's out of the court, you don't get a point. You might have a quick conversation about a sport that you both like that relates to the word boundaries, that seeds the idea that now you can implement later during the hypnotic session.
That's nice, and the brain will pick up on this, even though it's a different kind of boundary. You can also use metaphors in a classical hypnosis session with a client after you awaken them. We know they're not asleep, don't write to us. After bringing them out of hypnosis to cement the changes you've made, so that they come out of hypnosis, they're sitting there maybe in some sort of relaxed state, just about ready to go home, and you're just looking at your notes, and you can throw in a quick metaphor there and say, oh, the client I had in yesterday, his situation was so similar to yours, and do you know what happened? He found that when he went home, he was just in the best mood he'd been in for ages, and he slept so well too. He woke up the next day and said, I feel amazing. Now, you've given a little story about another person who had a similar situation, and the brain can map that across as well.
And it can be a story about a prior client, or it can be a story about the vacation that you went on, or that your friend told you they went on. You can somehow find a way to graft it in.
Or it could be about you.
Yeah, there you go. You can graft it into whatever was going on in the conversation previously. So if you started the session and there was some discussion about a vacation coming up, then you do the therapy, you might graft that idea of vacation into an isomorphic metaphor that you've created on the fly that will just cement that change. So that's a really nice thing to do. The other thing that we'll point out is, of course, if you're not a hypnotist or hypnotherapist, air quotes, but you're a personal coach, or you're a life coach, or you're a NLP practitioner, whatever you want to call yourself, if you're in the business of helping other people make changes, it's the same thing as hypnosis to us. So you can use hypnotic metaphors in those sessions.
Yes, and also realize you're using hypnotic metaphors already. You probably just don't realize it. How much more powerful it is when you understand the process and you can do it intentionally.
All right, so there you have it. That is how to use hypnotic metaphor. We hope you enjoyed it. I'm Chris Thompson. This is Mike Mandel. And we are Mike Mandel Hypnosis. And make sure you click the subscribe button on YouTube and then ring the bell so you'll always be notified of our latest videos. Check the links in the description below this video as well if you're watching it on YouTube, so you can find other relevant links, including the Mike Mandel Hypnosis Academy, which is your best way to study with us online. And you'll love it. Thanks again. See you in the next video, and good night.